Welcome to Minerva Meets. I'm your host, Sonal Chandler, and this is episode 11. Today we're going to be talking about maritime cybersecurity. And before we dive in, I wanted to introduce my guest, Walter Anderson. I've known Walter for some time now, and I know that he stands at the forefront of maritime cybersecurity, leveraging over 2 decades of experience in business, leadership, and cybersecurity strategy. As the world becomes increasingly reliant on global shipping and logistics, Walter has made it his mission to help maritime organizations protect their critical infrastructure from evolving cyber threats. His work with port authorities and maritime operations has provided him with unique insights into the vulnerabilities and challenges that the maritime industry faces today. As a vCISO, Walter has a proven track record of helping organizations build strong cybersecurity programs and is deeply invested in exploring the future of maritime cybersecurity from emerging threats to innovative technologies that will shape the industry. Welcome to the show, Walter. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Sonal. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
So today I wanted to have you on the show to talk a little bit about cybersecurity in the maritime industry because what piqued my interest in this area was a recent strike that happened here on the East Coast with the port authorities. And there was a little bit of a panic that happened because some of the East Coast port workers were going to go on strike. And I actually remember receiving a text message that said, "Hey, buy all the toilet paper that you can." It was almost like the pandemic. And then I was like, wait a minute, I wonder how security works in this space. And then I remembered that you are also in the maritime space, and I thought, let me get Walter on. So I'd love to, start off by just understanding a little bit about how you got into the industry and what led you here.
Sure. I'd love to share that with you. I want to comment. I was actually traveling the time the strike was looming, and I was going from the Midwest from like Arizona, driving across to the Pacific in LA, and I noticed there's a huge amount of vehicle traffic, especially trucks on the road. And then when I tuned into what was really going on, it was goods and services were being redirected from the East Coast to the West Coast. So there was this panic of getting everything shifted before a major strike took place. Fortunately, it wasn't that bad. It goes to show you that disruption in the transportation sector and what people are prepared to do in order to ensure the arrival and the delivery of goods and services and keep products going, because our economies are very dependent upon what takes place.
Interesting to realize what it takes to get this specific good all the way from where it's manufactured into your home.
I guess that kind of is a segue that leads me to how I got involved and what my passion for maritime cybersecurity. So for the last 9 or 10 years, I've been passionate about maritime cybersecurity. I live on Vancouver Island, so surrounded by a body of water on the west coast of Canada, and goods and services have to get to and from the island, obviously, and typically by water transportation. And so we understand how logistics and ports and logistics are critical to our local economy. I naturally found myself working in the maritime cybersecurity space with maritime organizations. For many years, I ran a managed services provider, and my clients were tied, obviously, to the maritime sector, transportation sector, and one of them is the Port of Nanaimo. And so once I sold my MSP, I began contracting directly with organizations like the Port of Nanaimo, Western Stevedoring, logistics companies, the BC Vehicle Processing Center. And my focus specifically has been strengthening their cybersecurity framework. So that's really where my journey in maritime cybersecurity took shape.
Well, that's interesting, and I can see how being in that area that you would naturally gravitate to that space as well. But I'm curious to really get an understanding if you can maybe give us a little bit of an overview of how the maritime industry looks or thinks of cybersecurity. And is it, we talked about how if there is a disruption in this sector, how it paralyzes the economy. And, curious to understand how sophisticated or lack of sophistication exists within the maritime industry when it comes to cybersecurity.
The organizations are much like many other organizations in different sectors, and transportation is a critical sector, right? A critical infrastructure sector here in Canada as well as in the US. So I guess one of the keys or key milestones when I was conducting a cybersecurity assessment for a logistics company, Western Stevedoring, and following the NIST cybersecurity framework, what I was involved in doing was they had 5 business units, and I was assessing their findings and presenting them to the executive leadership team. So the assessment revealed a wide range of vulnerabilities and underscored the need for stronger cybersecurity measures. It was an eye opener, not only for myself, but for the leadership, and a really turning point in my own understanding how critical cybersecurity is in maritime operations. For many years, I think that we've really taken for granted that security is always in place, but we don't really get into the controls, the administrative controls or operation controls, which are critical to establishing a good cybersecurity posture or maturity within an organization. And typically, we're all focused on the business at hand, operations of the business productivity, revenue, these sort of things. And sometimes security becomes an oversight. When we dig down and start doing assessments and looking at where weaknesses and vulnerabilities might be in an organization, it's surprising to find out that much of that is in processes and not necessarily the technology, and where it can be corrected with a little bit of effort and without a lot of expense.
That's interesting. So, in your journey in the maritime space, have you found that there's process that could directly impact the security posture?
Yeah, well, there's a number of different areas within frameworks that need to be assessed and reviewed and improved upon. Many of those are administrative. Um, we're talking about access controls, not only administrative and operational type controls where you have business processes where you're exchanging or sharing information, and that information should be secured, ideally encrypted at rest or encrypted in transit,
Mhm.
and that the people who are accessing information not only within the organization but your key stakeholder and partners within your supply chain, have established good cyber hygiene. They've got good cyber practices when it comes to authentic identity, access, who's accessing the information and how often, as well as the physical controls, because we're moving goods and services. So many times we have trucking companies, logistic companies, shipping companies, freight companies, many of these types of
Mhm.
industries around that, moving goods and services from shipping vessels
Yeah.
to land and back again. And it's the security of those containers, that goods and services, the security of the people, because it's not that we want to protect all of the goods and services so much as we want to protect the people. And that's what it really comes down to.
What I'm curious to understand, because I don't have any visibility into how the maritime, industry works. So if you could paint this picture of the different components of the maritime industry and how it's set up and what are the different components that need to be secured just at the highest level so that our listeners can get an understanding of the scale of this thing.
Sure, I'll do what I can, do my best here to try to
Sure,
give you
yeah.
the big picture here, kind of thing. I think what I want people to understand is that the maritime industry really is the backbone of global trade. It's responsible for the transporting of 90% or more of the world's goods. So, in other words, over 90% of all the goods and services that we use moves through the maritime transportation sector.
That's
So,
that's amazing because,
yeah,
I'll be honest with you, I don't think that that really resonated for me until the pandemic. Because I remember hearing in the news of all ships just standing or sitting out there in the water waiting to get to a port because there weren't people to unload it. There was just a lot of that happening. And I didn't realize how much confusion can happen or how much backlog and what that impact can do downstream. So
it's
sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, no, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, that's good. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's important to understand that this is a vast network of ships,
Yeah.
ports, and logistics systems, and we all heavily rely on digital technologies for
Mhm.
efficiency, automation, and this increased digital transformation or digitalization creates an exposure. It's created an exposure. To significant cyber risks. So, for example, a successful cyber attack on a major port or shipping line could disrupt the entire global supply chain. It can effectively cause billions in economic damage and threaten national security. So, the interconnected nature of maritime operations, a single breach can have far-reaching consequences. So it really makes cybersecurity measures absolutely essential. for the industry's continuity and for the global economy. So if I can give you an example, it wasn't that long ago we had an attack in Australia. You may have heard of it. DP World. It was back in November last year, 2023. This cyber attack did have a significant financial impact to the Australian economy. It disrupted operations at four major ports in Australia. That accounts for 40% of the maritime freight for that entire country, and you have
Wow.
entire continent of Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Um,
what
so
happened?
my understanding was it came down to a piece of technology that had a configuration that was a vulnerability that wasn't addressed in time. So, in other words, they had an appliance and the threat actors found a vulnerability in that appliance, which got them into the network. And as part of the mitigation steps, DP World had paused or shut down operations on these major ports for several days.
Several
It took
days. Oh, wow.
several days. They finally recovered full operations and after about 10 days, but it slowed down the entire goods and services shipments. And while the actual costs were never really revealed, we can assume that it was in the millions of dollars. And many of these time sensitive goods, were stranded, sitting on vessels, were at anchorage or at sea because they couldn't process them at the docks and bring them into the country, or let alone leave the country on egress of the
Goodness.
ports. So, something as simple as an update on a system can affect the national economy. So, getting back to having robust cybersecurity controls and measures, these are critical, and having the resources to implement these to protect the supply chain of goods and services that we all depend upon. And like you said, an example in the pandemic, it really changed a lot of things. Today, we're so used to ordering products to our front door, Amazon and the like.
Mhm.
And it's like when it doesn't show up on that particular day, or there's a delay due to inclement weather or something, like what's going on? We have this
Yeah.
instant gratification these days,
Yeah.
expectation these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
But we don't stop and pause and think about all of the steps and the logistics and all of the people and all of the systems that took that product to go from a warehouse somewhere or a manufacturer to your front door. All of those people and all of those organizations are all part of the supply chain. And
Absolutely.
that's the groceries in our stores and the beer in the liquor stores and the everything else that we worry about.
Yeah.
It's all dependent upon goods and services and the transportation and largely upon the maritime sector.
Yeah. So, do you think that the threats that happen from a transportation perspective between aviation and maritime, there's like a similar types of threats, or does maritime face different types of threats, or they're all the same but just different methods?
Well, there's a lot of similarities, and parallels with air transportation, marine transportation, and especially when it comes down to security. So, back on September 11th, there was a big eye opener when we had that terrorist attack in the US, and tragic and traumatic for many people even today. That was an eye opener for the airline industry too. They
Yeah.
really locked down systems after that. And developed new systems and more awareness around security and then cybersecurity as a result of that. So, we know that Homeland Security and the FBI and other organizations are very, very conscious of security and cybersecurity when it comes to air transportation. The maritime industry is equally as important. However, it didn't get the attention. And,
Yeah.
thank goodness there wasn't any major, things that would have triggered that, but it is now picking up pace. More organizations are consciously aware that there are threat actors out there exploiting organizations for ransomware, and denial of services to disrupt the operations of organizations. Not long ago in Canada, here there was an example where a number of ports here in Canada had a denial of service attack, a distributed denial of
Hmm.
service, DDoS. It was allegedly by the pro-Russian hacker groups, the No Name 5716. Um, and so they included a number of ports like Port Halifax, Nova Scotia, Montreal, Quebec, other Nanaimo, Port Saguenay, Trois Rivers, Baladoon, I think. And fortunately, it was a disruption in their websites. It did affect port operations, but not enough to affect the cargo. And so everything kept moving.
Hmm.
They were able to remediate and mitigate the attack by the activists. But it goes to show you that these attacks were part of a broader campaign that are targeting Canadian government, U.S. governments, finance, transportation, energy sectors, and organizations like the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity. They get involved. The FBI get involved. Homeland Security get involved. These disruptive type of attacks can affect the national security and the continuity of all of our goods and services.
Yeah.
Um,
I
it,
imagine that as these ports become more modernized, if you will, I'll just use that word digitally, however, but as they become more modernized and the ability to attack them and that vulnerability becomes larger, right, as well, because then if they're not secure, they're open to a lot more risk. And so when you approach one of your clients in this sector, where do you start? Do you have the same challenges of getting them to understand that cybersecurity and trying to mitigate these risks is important? Or are they like, yep, we need this and we've got to get going on this? Where do most of your clients in this area fall?
well, most of the
Sorry,
clients,
and I'm so sorry.
yeah.
The reason why I'm asking this question is because I find that with small to mid-sized organizations, convincing them that they need it is the first challenge, right? Like there's this whole belief that, oh, it's not going to happen to me, so I really don't need to worry about it. And it's quite frustrating, right? Because we all know that having a secure environment is important. So I'm curious to understand, and I'll finally let you answer the question is if you find that with your clients in the maritime industry as well.
I do, but I think it's a common myth that people will think, oh, I'm not a target. I'm a small organization. So
Yeah.
examples it because small businesses, and but it affects all types of organizations, whether you're a small business, medium, or enterprise, or you're part of the critical infrastructure for a country. And the awareness is a challenge to get through to the leadership teams in sometimes. They're very focused on the business operations or the organization's operations. They do know that security and cybersecurity is important.
Hmm.
It's hard to get in some cases, some buy-in, and that's because they aren't looking at it from the right lens. And when you come at it from a risk perspective, and you speak the language sort of the boardroom and
Hmm.
with the financial impact to the organization, loss of productivity or operations or reputational, those are things that leadership teams and boards are concerned about, right? Is that will this impact the revenue of the organization, and will people will be able to do their jobs, as opposed to the details and the technical aspects of it. Most executive leadership teams aren't really strong in the technical arena. They understand business. That's what they do. That's their job. And they're really good at it. And so we have to come to them from that perspective.
Yeah.
And so it's working with an organization, approaching them, and what is the solution that we need to solve? What is the problem? So once you identify the problem, you look at the solution without going into a lot of details with that organization, but you get them to engage with you, then to do an assessment, but then you're working with different parties within that organization. So you work with
Mhm.
operations, you work with management, then you work with the technical people, and you do your assessment, complete the assessment, and then you find your results and your findings, and you present that back to the leadership team. That needs to be communicated in such a fashion that if you don't do this, this will happen. These are the risks. And most of these organizations do enterprise risk management, do it very well. And cybersecurity tends to be a portion of that, often small and overlooked, and
Yeah.
where it is today becoming more and more critical because the impact on organization from a ransomware threat it can be in the millions of dollars, can disrupt. We talked about how it can disrupt national security and economies of countries. It's also important that there are people here that have livelihood and need to continue to work. So people think cybersecurity is a technical problem. It's
Yeah.
or an IT problem. Cybersecurity is a people problem. It's about business operations and people in the businesses and keeping them safe and secure. And what we know today statistically is that 1% of the breaches today are caused by human error. And
Yeah.
so it's about creating this culture, a security culture, and this awareness within the organization that everybody in the organization, all the people involved, are in security. So you're the human firewall. When that email comes in or that social engineering phone call and they're trying to coerce or trick you into doing something that is not your normal process or some creating some urgency or some trick to get you to click and access a link or a website or download a file or open an attachment, that you want to pause and think before you click. Is this
Yeah.
really who they say they are? Or is this, and then check on on another back channel. Is this really going on? Quite often, that will prevent these types of things from happening. And so
Yeah.
it's about people, about helping solve problems and keep things operating and prevent things from going wrong.
Yeah. Does the maritime industry have any types of regulatory requirements or compliance needs? Because I think that, some of these cybersecurity things tie in very nicely with that, right? Like just like how in healthcare there's HIPAA, is there a maritime type compliance or standard that needs to be met?
Yes. So there's the IMO and the industry and maritime organizations. There are many regulatory requirements. That Marine Transportation Act is another one. That the security is paramount, and there's global overreach on the maritime security. Then there's national, and then it does break down. So the number of regulatory and requirements vary from countries and organizations, but overall, it does boil down to the same sort of frameworks and practices that we would apply to any other organization and critical infrastructure for a nation and in business. So those would be again, we kind of try to simplify it. We've got administrative, operational, and technical and physical. These are all areas that need to be kind of reviewed, evaluated, and assessed. And we look for vulnerabilities and weaknesses when there. And then the businesses need to look at the risk. Do they accept that risk? Do we take steps to mitigate, create compensating controls to prevent the risk from happening? And then do we transfer the risk through insurance, like cyber insurance? And have they addressed all of the physical safety of an organization? Because threat actors also take advantage of tailgating and piggybacking coming in through organizations, USB drops, getting in. And so just simple things like clean desk policies and having access controls in place and monitoring and measuring those can greatly reduce a lot of the risk that's involved in not only maritime, but with all types of organizations. But going back specifically to regulatory requirements, all maritime organizations have to fall under a number of them. These are all important.
So I'll give you an example. So the FTC has the FTC safeguard rules, right, that require financial organizations to maintain an information security program. And it's out there. If you go to their website, it's written. And yet a lot of financial organizations don't understand that, right? And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had where when I bring this up, they're like, oh, I don't think that applies to us. And as we start digging deeper, I'll show that, yeah, it does. And it's interesting because the rule is out there, but yet the businesses, organizations that are affected by the rule and that need to take some action, there seems to be some type of disconnect there. And, I'm like scratching my head trying to figure out, why. And I think some of it is because there really isn't enforcement. And I think soon enough it's going to be coming. But I bring this up because do you see that type of thing in the maritime industry with compliance and regulation? Like they might have a line item, but is it actually overlooked? Is it followed? Is it pretty strict and carried out in the right way?
I'm familiar with the FTC safeguard rules, and there are 17 amendments that were put
Hmm.
out in the latest amendment. And these are all cybersecurity, hygiene processes and controls. Do you have a written information security plan?
Hmm.
Incident response planning, and it kind of breaks it down into areas where these assessments need to be addressed. These are vulnerabilities, and these assessments have to be addressed clearly. And with this maritime, we've got the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and they require shipping companies to address cyber risks and safety in their management systems. So the European Union has a directive that applies to all ports and shipping companies. The U.S. Coast Guard also has issued a maritime cybersecurity guidelines. So staying compliant, these evolving regulations, this requires regular risk assessments. And
Yeah.
in reporting incidents in Canada, there's a new bill C-26 that's going through legislation. But what it really means to these organizations and in transportation is the mandatory reporting of incidents. What happens is that there's a cybersecurity event or an incident breach doesn't always get reported in a timely fashion, which can affect other similar type organizations. And we're finding that the faster that these get reported and addressed, the sooner we can help everybody else prevent these type of attacks from the threat actors. And so they're pushing forward to making these type of reporting a mandatory process and putting in fines for people who don't report or don't report in time and that kind of thing. We'll see more and more of this taking place in countries, whether it's in the US or whether it's Canada. We're all very concerned about this. And so the organizations that manage the safety, whether it's the IMO or we've got Homeland Security or Center for Security in Canada, developing these types of new regulations and getting them through government legislation, it's going to help. It's going to solve a lot of problems. That's the objective here with getting these types of cyber incidents reported to get everybody on the same level. Again, many of these organizations, and then going back to your earlier comment, they don't know what they don't know. The reason why they haven't got this in place is they haven't got resources. There hasn't somebody like myself come along and said, I can help. I can see the problems. I can help you solve those problems, and I can give you a roadmap that can get you to where you need to be. And by addressing these issues in this roadmap, you can then strengthen your security, shore up your systems. You can build the cybersecurity posture and culture and maturity of the organization up with the objective of reducing the risk to the organization and keeping the business and operations and people safe.
Imagine that it can get pretty confusing when you're trying to comply to all these different rules and regulations and, who's ensuring that one isn't negating the other, which I'm sure that, I would hope to think that that's happening because I would hope that the Coast Guard is talking to the IMO and that their standards are somewhat aligned so that individual organizations aren't just jumping through hoops and spending their resources trying to comply. But I don't know, based on what I'm seeing and from talking to you, it sounds like there's probably a little bit of confusion there, and trying to navigate that space is really why it's in their best interest to engage with someone like you.
Yeah, and it's staying compliant is really important
Yeah.
with regulatory bodies and organizations and government as well. So these evolving regulations that involve these regular risk assessments and implementing, good, robust cybersecurity measures and reporting of incidents. But what I want people to understand, it's not just about ticking boxes, right?
Right,
It's an
right. Yeah.
ongoing effort. It's a
Yeah.
program that is ongoing, and we need to stay ahead of these new threats and ever evolving, regulatory landscapes. It's always changing, and
Cyber
it's
threats are changing and evolving and becoming more sophisticated, right? And I find that even in my work, like you said, it's not a box checker, it's not a one and done thing. It's an ongoing thing because these cyber threats and these criminals they're smart. Right, where it's not a bunch of dummies in a corner just trying to hack into a system. It's very sophisticated and it's continuously evolving. And so having a program in place and somebody helping you navigate that, I think is very important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the amount of money that's created or exploited in cybercrime is in the trillions, and it's greater than most
Yeah.
GDPs of most countries next to
Yeah.
US, Canada, and China, right? It's just unbelievably huge and massive, mind-boggling. And
Yeah.
the criminals, they know this and they're very smart. And so nation state actors and other organizations are very, very sophisticated. They have businesses, for example, ransomware as a service. You can become an affiliate of a ransomware organization and they will train you, teach you. And the dark web, there's marketing materials and campaigns and email and all these templates. And they even have a 1-800 helpline, if you're a threat actor and you need to exploit somebody. And they will do this because they know how much it's unreal how much this is. It's an insane thing. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of things out there,
Yeah.
especially on the dark web for helping people who want to exploit other people. And these organizations are very sophisticated. Business centers, help centers, management teams. It's a business, but are very organized.
Yeah.
And I think it now outpaces, the drug cartels. And they're switching because it's so much
Yeah.
easier to sit in a chair and exploit somebody
Right.
today, make millions of dollars by holding their information ransom. So there's just, I guess, again, we talked about the landscape evolving, but maritime transportation, is now becoming an increasingly popular target, or the threat actors are increasingly targeting maritime infrastructure as part of major geopolitical conflicts, right? So we
Yeah.
see this stuff happening. So when I say that there was a DDoS attacks in the Canadian port authorities, it was a result of the prime minister speaking about the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, and then those
Mhm.
activists sort of coming at the transportation or the critical infrastructures of Canada because of what happens when these leaders and the global leaders are speaking about
Mhm.
geopolitical conflicts, whether it's Ukraine and Russia or Israel and Hamas and everything else that's taking
Mhm.
place, in the world. Those events have ripple effect. And this is not something that's new. This has been ongoing for years. But the maritime transportation sector is becoming more and more of a target. And we need to
Yeah.
step up and protect our livelihood in the transportation of goods and services through this critical infrastructure, this
Yeah, it's
transportation
it's
infrastructure.
it's interesting because what I hear you saying is that this maritime industry and just the future is it's evolving because they are becoming more digitized and innovative. And obviously, with new technologies coming out, they're embracing some of those, rightfully so, to help them become more efficient. But at the same time, cybersecurity needs to evolve with them, right? It can't be an afterthought. It needs to be something that's at the beginning of the conversation versus, oh, wait a minute, did we do this? And so it's really interesting to just learn a little bit about this. I don't think it gets enough attention. To be honest, I didn't really know a lot about this space until I met you. So I really appreciate that you're, bringing this awareness and, anything that we can do to help you with your cause and getting that message out there that security is
Mhm.
key for every industry, but specifically today we're talking about maritime. Any last words that you have for our listeners when it comes to the maritime industry? If there was one thing that they did, what would that be when it came to cybersecurity?
If I can recommend a few takeaways here, first of all, we've seen this rise of smart ports and autonomous vessels. These are creating all new vulnerabilities.
Hmm.
On the positive side, we have technologies like blockchain and quantum encryption, which hold out our promises for security operations, and because they can enhance the security of our supply chains. Quantum encryption can protect our communication systems and future threats. These are foreseeable advancements that include improving our communications satellite systems and navigation technologies. This, could prevent things like GPS spoofing and jamming. These are all changing quickly in a digital transformation because we relying so much on technology today to communicate and to move our products and services. So I think the first thing and the most important thing is that maritime cybersecurity is understanding how important and that it's essential to protecting global commerce. So
Hmm.
companies need to invest in securing their digital assets and to prevent these costly breaches from happening later on. So again, when I say that, I mean when you invest in securing your digital asset, it doesn't mean going out and buying the latest flashy lighty box and latest greatest software that you don't really understand what it does, but it's supposed to do something even better. It's about taking a good look at your business operations and how you're using those digital assets and what can you do to secure them more effectively. And
Hmm.
regular assessments. That's the
Yes.
second sort of most important thing is just keep doing assessments. It's not one and done. Just not like I will do one and we'll do another one in 5 years from now. No, you need to keep doing constant vulnerability scanning, do annual regular assessments, stay within the compliance because that's a changing landscape. That's all critical. And really staying proactive is the best defense against, these evolving cyber threats because it's going to continue to evolve and it's going to get tougher to protect these organizations. And finally, future proofing. What I mean by that is that we want to adopt emerging technologies like AI, artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum computing. We need to be agile. We need to be able to
Hmm.
adapt to new types of risks quickly. And cybersecurity in the maritime sector is only going to get more and more important as the industry continues to digitize. And that's happening, and it's happening everywhere. But in the maritime, I think it's most important because it affects our global commerce and the transportation of goods and services, which we all depend upon for our livelihood. And it really comes back down to people first and
Yeah.
foremost.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I think those were great takeaways. And I love throughout this conversation, you've used the words cyber hygiene. And I think that that's such a key term. And I appreciate that you've laid out these three takeaways as well. And my favorite of these three was the regular assessments, right? I think people often think that, oh, we're just going to get this done so that we could check the box or so I can show my insurance company that I did it. But they forget that it's an ongoing thing. So I really appreciate that you called that one out. Thank you for being on the show and wanted to give you an opportunity to let our listeners know how they can find you, where they can find you. Do you have a website, LinkedIn? Why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners?
Yes, thank you, Sonal. Thank you for having me on your show. Appreciate it. Yeah, if listeners are interested and they want to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. It's my name's Walter Anderson. You'll find me under Port Secure Cybersecurity is my business. So if you search for that, you'll also find my website, which is portsecurecyber.com. And happy to answer any questions you might have and provide any solutions that you are looking for to secure your operations, whether you're in the maritime industry or any other critical infrastructure.
Yeah, and we'll make sure we put these links in the show notes as well. I just wanted to remind anyone who's listening, if you wanted to get in touch with Minerva Consulting, you can contact us at let's talk at minervaconsultinginc.com. You can also visit our website at minervaconsultinginc.com. I have a few takeaways that I'd like to ask our listeners to take. The first one is please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a new episode. Leave a rating and add a comment. Until our next episode, thank you so much for joining.